At exactly 1 minute past midnight on July 6, 2018, a single line of text entered Chapter 99 of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule of the United States. This modification imposed a 25% import tax on new pneumatic rubber tires, stock pumps, spherical roller bearings, lithium primary cells. It targeted 278 specific products originating from the People's Republic of China. This was a $36 billion initial tariff package. It triggered immediate retaliation. Within months, that escalation engulfed $200 billion of Chinese imports under crippling 25% levies. American distributors scrambled to overhaul supply chains. The retail price of a Chinese-made space heater jumped from $48 to $60. Trade flowing from China to the United States plunged by 8.5%. The global economic order fractured. China was dethroned from its long-held position as America's largest trading partner. Mexico and Canada elevated to take its place. Public consciousness branded this exact event as the opening salvo of a sudden, unprecedented trade war. You saw the headlines. You watched the cable news anchors panic. Everyone acted like this conflict started on this exact day in 2018. But the underlying reality reveals a vastly different timeline. The tariffs enacted in 2018 did not represent the beginning of the conflict. They marked the explosive culmination of a 30-year economic standoff. The true genesis of this trade war lies buried in the forgotten intellectual property battles of the early 1990s. It lies in the high-stakes World Trade Organization debates of the year 2000, and it lies in a slow, generational erosion of the American industrial heartland. Let's look at the baseline. In 1990, the U.S. trade deficit with China was $10 billion. By 2000, it hit $83.6 billion. By 2010, $273 billion. By 2018, $419.2 billion. Foundational friction between the two economies began decades before any 25% tariff took effect. From its inception in 1989, the United States Trade Representative published an annual Special 301 report. China appeared on every single priority watch list. The core grievance centered on rampant piracy and the forced transfer of technology. American intellectual property faced systemic expropriation. This ranged from Hollywood motion pictures to highly sensitive software. In May of 1991, the United States initiated a formal Section 301 investigation. They identified 4 critical deficiencies in Chinese trade practices. 1. The absolute absence of product patent protection for chemicals and pharmaceuticals. 2. The total lack of copyright protection for American works. 3. Deficient overall copyright regulations. And 4. Completely inadequate protection of trade secrets. The United States threatened billions in punitive tariffs. In response, Beijing would sign sweeping agreements promising massive crackdowns only to completely ignore the enforcement. By 1996, American trade officials found that Chinese customs authorities were doing absolutely nothing to stop the export of pirated goods. The government was taking zero action against massive factories churning out illegal optical discs. In downtown Shanghai, state-of-the-art facilities operated in broad daylight. Employees in crisp white coats oversaw American-made machinery. That machinery molded, encoded, laminated, and painted a new pirated CD every 7 seconds. Every 7 seconds! We aren't talking about bootleggers selling mixtapes out of a trunk. These were massive, state-of-the-art, government-tolerated factories churning out pirated American software. By the late 90s, 99% of all computer software in China was stolen. 99%. Analyses place the annual cost to the U.S. economy from counterfeit goods, pirated software, and trade secret theft between $225 billion and $600 billion. The trade secret share alone cost the economy between $180 billion and $540 billion annually. This industrial espionage ranged from household goods to advanced aerospace components. It operated as an illegal subsidy. It allowed Chinese firms to slash research and development costs by simply absorbing American innovation. The persistent friction over intellectual property and market access set the stage for the most consequential economic policy decision of the modern era. China spent 13 years negotiating entry into the World Trade Organization, and on November 15, 1999, the United States and China finalized a bilateral accession agreement. The pact mandated steep reductions in Chinese tariffs. It dropped agricultural tariffs to an average of 17.5%. It slashed automobile tariffs from 100% down to 25% by 2006. It required the elimination of import quotas. It granted foreign businesses the absolute right to import and distribute goods directly within China. But none of this happens automatically. To actually execute this agreement and open the floodgates, the United States Congress had to make the single most consequential economic vote of the modern era. They had to grant China permanent normal trade relations, or PNTR. Since 1980, the United States granted China normal trade status on a conditional annual basis. We subjected the nation to yearly reviews regarding its human rights record and immigration policies under the Jackson-Vanik waiver. PNTR stripped away this annual review. It permanently decoupled American trade policy from Chinese domestic conduct. The Clinton administration launched an immense political offensive to secure PNTR passage. President Bill Clinton delivered a defining speech on March 8, 2000. He laid out the doctrine that governed American economic policy for an entire generation. Clinton framed the agreement as a one-way street, benefiting American workers. The United States required no new market opening steps. China committed to tearing down its protectionist walls. Clinton promised that American companies would export products without exporting jobs. Rejecting the agreement, he warned, would result in American competitors in Europe and Asia capturing the massive Chinese markets. Clinton framed the economic argument merged seamlessly with a geopolitical theory of transformation. The administration asserted that economic liberalization would inevitably fracture the Chinese Communist Party's monopoly on power. By joining the WTO, China imported the defining value of democracy, economic freedom. Clinton argued that the shift away from these state-owned enterprises stripped the government of its role as an ultimate employer, landlord, and nanny. It forced citizens into a private sector where they demanded greater political liberty. Information technology served as the ultimate weapon in the administration's theory. Clinton noted that internet access in China had quadrupled from 2 million to 9 million users. He famously dismissed the Chinese government's attempts to censor the web as akin to trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Liberty, he declared, spread by cell phone and cable modem. Corporate America aggressively backed the initiative. The Business Roundtable, representing executives from Boeing, General Motors, and Citigroup, deployed $9.2 million in direct lobbying. Multinational corporations poured $58 million in soft money and political contributions into the campaign cycle. Governors from over 40 states and territories sent letters to Congress advocating for the passage of PNTR. A fierce coalition mobilized in opposition, warning of impending industrial catastrophe. The AFL-CIO and the United Steelworkers spearheaded a massive resistance. They generated 200,000 letters to House members. Labor leaders argued the agreement served multinational companies seeking to relocate factories to China and import cheap products back to the United States. This directly mirrored the devastating outcomes of the North American Free Trade Agreement. In fact, Representative Bernie Sanders denounced the legislation on the House floor. He predicted the pact allowed corporations to outsource American jobs to a nation paying starvation wages of 20 cents an hour. He pointed out the stark hypocrisy of corporate executives praising China's authoritarian system while simultaneously dismantling the American middle class. Representative Sherrod Brown highlighted the absurdity of normalizing trade with a partner engaged in rampant intellectual property piracy, currency manipulation, and the use of slave labor. Despite previous vows in 1992 to link trade to human rights, Clinton betrayed that promise in May of 1994. He completely severed human rights in China from U.S. trade policy. This paved the exact way for the PNTR push. The corporate lobbying and presidential pressure overpowered the resistance. The House of Representatives passed the PNTR legislation by a vote of 237 to 197 on May 24, 2000. The Senate followed suit with an 83 to 15 bipartisan vote on September 19, 2000. President Clinton signed the bill into law on October 10, 2000. China officially entered the World Trade Organization the following year. Predictions of American export dominance failed to materialize. What happened next destroyed the industrial heartland. The United States trade deficit with China exploded. It expanded from $83.6 billion in 2000 to $273 billion by 2010. The influx of cheap, subsidized Chinese goods decimated the American manufacturing base in an economic phenomenon academics later labeled the China shock. The magnitude of the disruption exceeded all macroeconomic forecasts. Trade deficit with China up 401%. Total manufacturing employment down 26%. Manufacturing share of private sector down 50.5%. Between 2001 and 2018, the surging trade deficit eliminated or displaced 3.7 million American jobs. Manufacturing bore the absolute brunt of the devastation, accounting for 75.4% of the displaced positions. The macroeconomic data is undeniable. Import competition from China caused nearly 60% of all United States manufacturing job losses between 2001 and 2019. In raw numbers, the United States shed 5.4 million manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2011. That translates to an average loss of 1,276 factory jobs every single day. For over a decade, the daily attrition compounded the damage. A net total of 66,486 manufacturing establishments closed their doors permanently during this period. The geographic concentration of the devastation amplified the economic trauma. Job losses clustered heavily in labor-intensive manufacturing communities across the Midwest, the Deep South, and the South Atlantic. The reality on the ground was catastrophic. The academic models assumed that a laid-off factory worker in Ohio would simply pack up, move to a new city, and become a software engineer. That didn't happen. Displaced workers didn't migrate, they just remained trapped in declining, hollowed-out regional economies. Laid-off personnel converted nearly 1-for-1 into the ranks of the long-term unemployed or exited the labor force entirely. The resulting economic scarring manifested in plummeting local tax revenues, depressed housing prices, and collapsing wages for high school-educated workers. As employment vanished, reliance on government transfer programs surged. The localized economic depression bred profound social crises. It triggered measurable increases in childhood poverty, single parenthood, and mortality rates linked to drug and alcohol abuse. Macroeconomic statistics fail to capture the localized annihilation of century-old industrial ecosystems. The story of American deindustrialization is written in the hollowed-out factories of specific municipalities. Newton, Ohio stood for a century as the undisputed washing machine capital of the world. By 1924, Maytag produced 1 out of every 5 American washers. They survived the Great Depression completely unscathed. The Maytag Corporation grew into an industrial titan. It served as the singular economic engine for the town of 15,000 residents. At its zenith, the Maytag facility in Newton employed over 3,000 workers. It provided full medical benefits, robust pensions, and middle-class stability to 1 out of every 5 residents in the city. Employees viewed the company as a second family, bleeding Maytag blue over decades of dedicated service. But the globalization wave broke the company. Facing immense pricing pressure from foreign imports and seeking cheaper labor, Maytag faltered in the early 2000s. In 2006, the Whirlpool Corporation acquired Maytag for $1.37 billion. Seeking the best cost and distribution metrics, Whirlpool immediately initiated the liquidation and closure of the Newton plant. They shifted production to alternative facilities in other states and Mexico. By late 2007, the sprawling 1.9 million square foot manufacturing complex spanning 175 acres sat entirely vacant. The closure eliminated 1,800 local jobs in a single blow. It turned off the noise of the presses. It halted the shipment of assembly lines. The sudden evaporation of the primary employer decimated the local tax base. The plant's heartbeat, the mechanical roar of presses and assembly lines that defined the town for 100 years, went completely silent. Workers lost the promise of 30-year retirements. They were forced to manage vacant properties or seek lower-paying employment. A similar devastation ravaged the furniture industry of the American South. The 1999 bilateral WTO agreement drastically lowered tariff barriers on wooden bedroom furniture. It opened the floodgates for low-cost Asian imports. Between 1999 and 2009, the North Carolina furniture manufacturing industry lost more than half of its jobs. In Galax, Virginia, the Von Bassett Furniture Company stood on the brink of erasure. Founded in 1919, the company anchored the town's economy as Chinese manufacturers dumped aggressively underpriced furniture onto the American market. Surrounding factories in Virginia and North Carolina shuttered by the score. John Bassett III spearheaded a relentless legal and political counteroffensive. By proving that Chinese firms exported products at prices below the cost of manufacturing, Bassett secured punitive duties on Chinese-made wooden bedroom furniture. This action successfully preserved 700 manufacturing jobs in Galax. But Von Bassett survived as a stark anomaly. The vast majority of its regional competitors vanished permanently, relocating their entire supply chains to Asia. While the American manufacturing sector spent 2 decades bleeding out, the Chinese government wasn't just sitting still. They had already won the war for cheap consumer goods. Now, they were preparing for the final phase. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang signed the Made in China 2025 initiative into action in May 2015. MIC25, the 10-year blueprint, outlined a meticulous strategy to transform the nation from a labor-intensive workshop into a technology-intensive powerhouse, driving high-value production. The plan identified 10 core high-tech sectors for absolute global dominance: next-generation information technology, advanced robotics, aerospace engineering, artificial intelligence, new energy vehicles. The financial and regulatory architecture supporting MIC25 operated on an unprecedented scale. The government deployed hundreds of billions of dollars in state subsidies to bankroll domestic champions. They committed roughly $300 billion in 2018 alone. The initiative mandated aggressive localization targets. It required Chinese domestic content of core materials to reach 40% by 2020 and a massive 70% by 2025. The semiconductor industry sat at the absolute center of the strategy. Independence from foreign microchips provided breakthroughs in other areas of technology currently out of Beijing's reach. The strategy did not rely solely on domestic innovation. State-owned enterprises and government-backed funds accelerated the acquisition of foreign technology firms. Chinese acquisitions in the United States peaked at over $45 billion in 2016. Tech firms like Riot Games fell under full ownership of Tencent. And the industrial espionage escalated. State-sponsored hackers began utilizing incredibly sophisticated tools to infiltrate the networks of global service providers, leaving almost no digital fingerprints. They were siphoning highly sensitive commercial information and aerospace trade secrets directly to Chinese competitors. The revelation of the MiC-25 agenda completely shattered the foundational assumption of the 2000 PNTR vote. The Clinton-era theory posited that integrating China into the global trading system forced the adoption of free market principles and democratic norms. Instead, Beijing weaponized its integration. They utilized the immense wealth generated by the American consumer market to fund an authoritarian state capitalist machine, a machine explicitly designed to displace American technological supremacy. The precise alignment of historical grievances triggered the explosive retaliation of 2018. When the United States Trade Representative launched a new Section 301 investigation, the findings directly echoed the ignored warnings of 1991 and 95. The resulting report documented that China directed the systematic acquisition of United States companies to extract cutting-edge technology. They supported unauthorized cyber intrusions to steal trade secrets. They utilized forced technology transfer regimes to bleed American firms of their most valuable assets. The 25% tariffs enacted on July 6, 2018, the ones targeting lithium batteries, ball bearings, and aerospace components, they were not arbitrary selections. They operated as surgical strikes. They aimed directly at the 10 sectors identified in the Made in China 2025 blueprint. The economic conflict dominating the modern geopolitical landscape does not represent a new war. It serves as the ultimate consequence of a 30-year policy failure. The United States tolerated rampant intellectual property theft in the 1990s to maintain diplomatic equilibrium. It sacrificed its industrial heartland in the 2000s on the theoretical promise that globalized trade democratized an authoritarian superpower. The factories in Newton and Galax were gutted. Millions of workers faced permanent displacement, and the trade deficit compounded into the hundreds of billions. Everyone thinks the trade war started with those tariffs in 2018, but by the time those tariffs finally fell, the global economic order had already undergone an irreversible transformation.